Hello there, you're very welcome to this week's session of Genos Live, and I feel like I should be emulating a TV presenter from the UK from years ago who used to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because we know that you're coming from literally all over the world to this session. So you're very, very welcome. And I know you're not here to talk about or to listen to me. You're here to hear Mary talk on the topic of ego and the part it can play in positively leading a team and how you can get over yourself and lead. And we're going to get Mary in very, very quickly and welcome her aboard. And I'm expecting we're going to have a really, really riveting conversation on a topic that I haven't seen covered in any sort of show like this, and haven't seen covered much in books either, the application in a positive way of ego to leadership. So we bring Mary in just a very few minutes, but before we do that, let me in the traditional manner ask you, where are you dialing in from? So is it morning, is it evening, is it afternoon? Where are you dialing in from? And look, there's so much bad news in the world, and it's such a tough world to be in. Why not share with us a one-liner on anything that has gone well for you this week, however small, or is going well for you, that'll make us feel good for you and allow us to vicariously enjoy your joy. So please pop that into the chat. And as you're doing that, my co-presenter Aoife will be there she is. My co-presenter Aoife will be monitoring that. So good morning, Aoife. How are you?
Good morning, Derek. Good. Great to be back with you today. Welcome, folks.
Great. So are we starting to get a couple of things popping into the chat already? I know we have something like a 15, 20-second delay from the time we put out the call, but just before I go on to the announcements, anybody in yet?
We have a few folks joining from Hong Kong, from Paris, from Cork in Ireland. Welcome, Emma. Jane's joining us from London. Bernice and Myrna in Lebanon. So folks, keep the comments coming. It's really great to have you with us and join us this morning over a cup of coffee.
Absolutely, and thanks for that, Aoife. And don't forget, pop something in, anything in that's going well for you or is giving you a source of joy or giving you a reason to smile so we can vicariously enjoy your sense of joy. But before we get into the session per se, let me just do the usual couple of announcements before we start. First thing is, we aim in this show to provide really purely informational content, really good, usable, chunky information that's going to be practically implementable afterwards. We don't tend to fill it with fluff, but we do give ourselves 45 seconds to a minute or thereabouts to tell you who we are. My name is Derek McCann. Genos International is the organization that we work for. And Genos International are a world-renowned emotional intelligence organization where our main core business is emotional intelligence assessments, and we provide assessments for the recruitment and selection process, for the development process, for helping salespeople to be more emotionally intelligent salespeople, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that makes it kind of unique in that way is we also provide off-the-shelf programs for our certified practitioners on resilience, psychological safety, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, empathy, anything that has to do with the way people show up to one another and helping people show up to one another in a way that they get the best from one another. So not only do we provide those programs directly to our clients, but we also certify either internal or external coaches, consultants, trainers, L&D professionals, etc., to be able to do what we do with our products and with our programs. We have certified more than 10,000 people over the last 20 years, and we've still got 7,500 of those active practicing on a global basis. So if that's something that's interesting to you, watch this space. One of the things we're most proud of is the fact that we have been one of the top 20 assessment companies in the world, according to trainingindustry.com, over the last 5 years. And when they write the citation for why we're selected as one of the top 20, they always talk about two things. One, the quality of our product and the ongoing innovation. And secondly, something we're very proud of, the way that our clients and our partners talk about the level of support that they get from us. So that makes us very proud. By the way, the certification program is approved by the ICF for continuing education credits, and the ICF has even made us one of very few global business partners. So we're very proud of the connections we have in general into the community. So let's get on with the session. And before I do dive into the session, let me tell you about next week. Now, I know Kira's likely to be on this session, and she'll smile when she hears this, but back in the day, my mum or dad might have called Kira a bit of a pistol. And a pistol to them was somebody who was full of energy, really vibrant, really upbeat, and whom, when you're around them, that you just couldn't help being energized. And that is Kira. Kira is one of our most successful practitioners, and she has delivered a lot of leading with emotional intelligence programs, applied emotional intelligence programs, and several others. And next week she's going to come along and she's going to talk to you about 5 things that you can do to more emotionally intelligently impact the people that you work with, deal with, or lead. So it's going to be a great session. It's going to be very upbeat. I mean, she is her own little power station. If you're really fast, you can grab your phone and hold it over the code on the screen, and that'll allow you to sign up directly for her session. If you're already subscribed to the reminder list, well, then you will get a reminder for Kira's session. If you're not subscribed to that list, well, then Aoife is going to drop a link into the chat so that you can sign up. And what we do is each week we just send you a reminder saying, here's the topic this week, here's what we're talking about, so that you can decide which ones you want to be there for. So that is next week. And then after that, we have this wonderful pyramid of a kind of a who's who from the world of how one shows up, how to get the best out of people. So it's really worth signing up for that reminder, subscribing for that reminder list, because we have some phenomenal guests coming along. But back to today's phenomenal guest, and back to Mary. So let me introduce Mary and bring Aoife back in, and here we go. So you're very, very welcome, Mary.
Hello, and nice to be here. And I'm really amazed by the international audience you've got today. It's great.
Yeah, we get a great mixture. I just noticing, Mary, you lucky devil, the sun is streaming in through your blinds there.
It is indeed. I'm based just outside of London, and it is a very lovely sunny morning. There was a beautiful sunrise this morning. I watched the dawn this morning.
Wow, good for you. Good for you. I'm not sure what I was doing at dawn this morning. Aoife, do you want to do a kind of semi-formal introduction to Mary, just to give folks a little bit on the background, and then let's dive straight in?
I would be delighted to. Folks, you're very, very welcome back to Genos Live this week. We are so delighted and honored to have Mary Gregory with us, who is a sought-after international leadership consultant, and she has led change for many organizations, including some really big names like First Choice Holidays, O2, Ralph Lauren and Tesco. And she is a trusted coach to senior executives in the private and public sector, and also designs and delivers leadership programs. I'm so excited to hear this topic today. She learned through both her work and life what really holds us back is ourselves and our ego. So therefore authored her book, Ego, Get Over Yourself and Lead. We've been hearing incredible feedback, particularly on your title as well, Mary. So we've a lot of people excited to hear you today. And her book has also made it to the bestseller list on Amazon. So I'm going to be representing the audience today. So I'm going to be hopping off and feeding questions to you. But Mary did just share some exciting news with us that she is very kindly going to gift 5 copies of her book to folks in the audience today. So I think we decided the first 5 to put their hand up in the comments and say, yes, please. And I will take a note of your name and we'll reach out to you to get your copy of the book to you. Am I correct in that, folks? Yeah?
Yep, absolutely.
Brilliant.
Spot on.
Well, I'm going to hand it over to you both. I'm really excited for this session. Mary, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
Great, thank you, Aoife. And Aoife will come back in with your questions. So start to pop the questions into the chat. Aoife will bring them in, and we'll serve them up to Mary as we go along. Mary, before we dive into the topic of the book, now Aoife kind of covered it in a formal way in the introduction, but just tell me, day to day, what is it you do and what is it you like to do? Because we get a very diverse audience, and I know that people are going to love this topic. And I'm just wondering, what do they reach out to you for after this session what could they reach out that would make you really happy?
Right. Well, that's great. Thank you for asking that. So day to day, what I'm particularly love to do is there's a range of things I love to do, but what I spend most of my time doing is working with executives on a one-to-one basis. So one-to-one executive coaching, particularly working with executives who are having to navigate change of some sort, or may find that things are very challenging for them at work and they need some extra support in terms of gaining some perspective and building their confidence back up. So that's sort of the executive coaching side. And then I design and deliver leadership programs for medium to large organizations. And particularly I have a speciality in working with women in leaders. So I do a lot of design and development for women leadership programs, but I also do generic leadership programs as well. But I think as I've got experience myself, I seem to be doing more and more with women leaders, to be honest.
Okay, and I know, and I kind of know the answer to this because when we did our initial conversation, and we're slightly off topic, but I think it's still going to be interesting to the audience. As a male who doesn't specialize, I was unsure as to exactly what are the kind of differences between the way one approaches a leadership program specifically for women versus a leadership program in general. And I was fascinated by the answer. Can you just share a little bit about that?
Well, yes. So the programs I run at the moment, I've also got an interest in getting men and women into dialogue, because I think it's not about one and the other. It's about working together and bringing the strengths of both together. That's a research interest I've got there. But in terms of the programs I deliver for women, they are specifically for women, and men don't attend them. Right. And sometimes you get this pushback in the organisation from the men saying, "Why can't I come on this program? Why should women have their own program?" And part of that is because men and women are different and they have differences. And the whole thing is that organisations were developed by men way back in the Victorian era, and therefore things in an unbiased way in a biased way rather, unconsciously biased way, are that the playing field is tilted towards men rather than women. So offering women a separate program where they can really open up and share what the challenges are for them, look at how they can navigate some of the challenges they're facing within the workplace to influence more as well, is really, really important. And it avoids that dynamic of what tends to happen is if you were having a mixed group, the dynamics and the biases and the things that were happening in the culture of the organisation show up in the group. Sure. And women don't open up as much. So it offers that space, and it's also looking at leadership through the lens of being a woman. Okay. And the final point on that as well is that in what we're dealing with today, the whole sort of volatility of the world that we're dealing with, all the fast-paced change and the uncertainty that there is, what we need from leadership and from leaders is different to what we might have needed even 20 years ago. And women naturally have a lot of those skills, so that ability to build relationships, to be much more sensitive to what might be going on in the dynamics of their team, all of those, to be able to work collaboratively, all of those are really important qualities and skills that women have naturally. And men, doesn't mean men can't learn them. Sure. And men do learn them. And men have other skills that are natural, that are positive. That's why I think it's about bringing them together ultimately. But I think I like to encourage women, because so often women are holding back in their confidence. Yeah. And I like to encourage them to recognise that they actually have a lot to offer in the leadership space in these modern times, and we can learn a lot from the way women go about things.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in our own particular area of specialization, consistently the research shows that women score higher on empathy, on compassion, and on
Yep.
emotional intelligence in general. So yeah, there's an interesting untapped potential there. Actually, just as we're talking,
Yes.
and this didn't occur to me when we had our meetup, this feels like something that would be a great topic for the future. Just to talk about how does one go about creating programs like that to leverage, if you like, that untapped potential. So I'm taking a
Yes.
note of that, and let's chat
Yeah, well,
about
let's
that.
keep talking about it. Let's
For
keep
sure.
talking about it.
For sure. So onto the topic of today. I think when people talk about particularly other people's egos or even their own egos, it's rarely in a positive sentence. Usually we're talking about it as in a derogatory way. But from reading your book, that's a very, very incomplete view of ego. Can you tell us a little
Yes.
bit about that?
Yes. So absolutely, that in the popular press and in the media, they like to focus on the negative and big up the negative side of
Yeah.
things. And of course, ego has developed a reputation, and not a very good reputation, in the way the media presents it. And what the media talks about is that part of ego where it's overinflated, very dominating, very big. They talk about he or she has a very big ego. It's all about them. They're not thinking about other people. Absolutely, that is one element of ego, but it's not black and white as the media would like to paint the picture of. It is much more complex than that, and much deeper. There's lots of many levels to ego, and ego isn't just loud and big. It's that part of ourselves that might hold us back as well. It's that small voice that stops us from speaking up in a
Yeah.
room.
Yeah.
That will be our ego, because my perspective of ego is it's very much around anything that's causing us social anxiety. We have developed strategies for dealing with that social anxiety, which is our ego. Our ego is a whole system of those strategies. It's a whole complex defense system that fends off social anxiety. So it can be us holding ourselves back and playing small and not stepping up, can also be our ego getting in the way, as well as being that big, let's push myself forward. If I beef myself up, maybe other people will beef me up as well, and make me look good as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just the overinflated side, it's the underinflated too.
Yeah, and it's just riffing on that a little bit in the book. I'm just looking down just to get a quote. You said that the ego is a highly developed survival strategy or defense strategy.
Yes.
How
Yes.
does that develop?
So, you think about when we're born, all of us born as babies, we are, completely don't really have a personality at that point. And we are like a sponge soaking everything up around us. You think about how an infant develops from birth in the first 3 years of life, just soaking everything up and learning from those around him and the different experiences that he or she has. And what then starts to happen is we have experiences when we're very young, and based on those experiences, we make decisions, and we do it unconsciously. And so say something happens that, say as a child, we get reprimanded for something, or we're told that we're wrong at something, we will internalize that and make a decision and develop a survival strategy for helping ourselves to feel okay. So we'll have that sense of, I'm not okay, so what can I do to make myself feel okay? Well, one strategy might be I start to please people. So
Right.
I'll start pleasing you in order that I feel okay, and I hope that you'll think I'm okay too. And that's dealing with our social anxiety. That is where that's an example of how our ego is starting to develop. But our ego develops in all sorts of different ways. In my book, I talk about ego traps, which is
Right.
just a way of trying to describe some of the ways that our ego can show up and how it can develop and how it gets embedded in our thinking. So it's almost like we become hardwired.
Yeah.
So I've learned that actually if I please people, that will relieve the anxiety, not just for me, but often for them as well. And therefore that becomes hardwired. And that works for me as a child as I'm growing up.
Sure.
But as I get to be an adult and I'm wanting to maybe step up as a leader in the workplace, people pleasing isn't always going to help me. There are times I'm going to have to learn to say no to people and put limits around things, and that will then start to cause me lots of anxiety again. And that's why self-awareness is so important around ego, becoming aware of what our ego traps are, how they might manifest, and then starting to find ways of being able to overcome them.
And it sounds like, I mean, if if you go back 40 years, I'm a techie, an engineer, and it sounds almost like what you're saying is that this is the programming that we get programmed as we go along by our experiences, and all these subroutines build up that are these unseen sets of rules and subroutines on the way we work, and they come from the earliest years and come all the way up into our adult lives and our leading. And I think the key thing, and you mentioned self-awareness, is it sounds like we're just not aware of those. And that's part of the problem. Or am I way off?
No, I think absolutely that ego is unconscious most of the time. And, we are probably in ego about 80% of the time. I do meet people who say, oh, I have no ego. And I'm like,
yeah.
I mean, you might be able to manage I think we can manage our ego, and self-awareness for me is at the hub of it all, that we have to build that self-awareness muscle in order to be able to manage our ego and be conscious of how we might be showing up. One of the embarrassments I had when my book came out was realizing that I've written all about ego and understanding it. And I had going on in my head this expectation on myself that I shouldn't have any ego. And every time I got activated or triggered, because our ego, we get triggered into it often unconsciously, I think afterwards, oh my God, that's dreadful role modeling in terms of the book I've written. But I think there's something about accepting, this is part of the paradox of ego, is part of being human, is that we do have one. Yeah. And we can't live without it because it's our survival strategy. But there are times we can't live with it.
Yeah, where it gets in the way.
Sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. And in fact, one of the things I picked on, and again, I'm looking just to my notes because I wanted to get the quotation correct. There's a word that is coming up all of the time over the last 2 years, and even more over the last couple of weeks because of events in the East. And that word is fear. And people were fearful of the pandemic, and just when they've started to become a little bit less fearful, then there's the specter of what's going on in the East. And one of the things you said there was when fear is present, it's always our ego kicking in. So if you are one of us, and I mean I include myself in that sometimes find themselves at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, or maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, gripped by fear. What's your best advice for kind of unpacking that or unpicking that or dealing with that in general?
Okay, so I mean the first thing, and again this is why self-awareness is so important, the first thing is to notice its fear, and that am I having a rational response here? Am I over dramatizing the situation here? What is the real feeling that I've got going on here? And recognizing that you're having that feeling and you are gripped by fear. I think that's the first thing to notice. Sure. And then there's different things you can do. I mean, in the moment, I would say the most important thing is to get yourself regrounded and get yourself present. Because fear lives in our worry about the future. So whenever we're worrying about the future, that's where we're given to fear.
Sure.
Whenever we might be thinking about the past and what happened, that's causing us to feel anxious in the moment, and also we'll be feeling anxious about what might happen as well, that will be fear-driven as well. So getting ourselves really present and grounded in the present is one way to deal with our fear. And the simplest way to do that is to take a breath. And if you're sitting down, make sure you've got both feet on the floor. Put both feet on the floor, get your back against the chair and take a deep breath. And you can change your state through just 2 or 3 deep breaths. It will change your state and get you connected into the present. And then ask yourself the question, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
Or another question that's useful is, what is so right now? So that you start to do a reality check of what is actually going on around you right now. To try and get rid of the fantasies that you've got going on about the future or what happened in the past so it's going to happen again, type thing. So that groundedness, I think, is really, really important.
You know, it's fascinating just hearing you talking about this, and I know our audience, and I know some of the people who come in here, and there'll be a lot of folks on emotional intelligence, a lot of people on mindfulness, and I often use an expression when I talk about these topics that they all feel like separate topics, but everything is connected to everything, and what's really interesting is you're talking there very much about mindfulness and as being a way of working with the unseen ego or the invisible ego and those invisible subroutines. So I know there's an awful lot of people who are kind of nodding and saying, yeah, I see the connections.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I talk about your personal foundation, and what I mean by that is it's how you take care of yourself. I talk about resilience a lot in my book,
right?
Because it's how you take care of yourself and how you make sure your personal resources are topped up from a physical point of view, from emotional, from psychological, and from a spiritual point of view as well, that you take care of yourself holistically, and that includes having some sort of mindfulness practice. Because for me, mindfulness is so valuable in keeping us aware and getting us back into the present. Such a useful practice to have. And it doesn't mean you have to meditate. I know I personally think meditation is fantastic for calming your entire limbic system. For some people, it doesn't work. You know, something I love to do is just go and connect with nature. And that gets me back and well into the present and calming my system. But whenever we're fear-driven, our system is going into overdrive. And that's why focusing on calming ourselves, getting ourselves present, is a great way to navigate our ego.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and I'm glad you made that distinction, because an awful lot of people start to switch off when you say mindfulness because they automatically think it means meditation. And like you, I find meditation really tremendous. My wife doesn't, and what she does is she goes out into nature when she needs to reconnect with herself. So it's really it's about shining a light of self-awareness, I guess, onto the unseen. So Ava, let me pull Ava back in here just to see what are we getting from folks. What sort of questions have we got? Oh, actually, before we start, did we get 5 people put their hands up and say gimme?
We did, more than 5. So I was watching very carefully at the first 5 that came in. So I've reached out to get everybody's addresses. So thank you for that offer, Mary. Obviously,
well, I tell you what, Ava, if I tell you what we do, we'll buy 5 copies as well, so that the next 5 down along also get it. Now, for so whoever was number 11 or 12, really sorry, come back next week and we'll try and have something for you then. So what about questions, Ava? Anything coming in from folks?
We do. We have plenty of questions coming in, and one here that I just think is fantastic. And personally, I would have loved to have this answer years and years ago in my career. But do you have any practical tips, Mary, to start a conversation with the group of senior leaders on ego?
And who's that from, Ava?
John.
Okay, so I think the first thing to get is to not, senior leaders, everyone has ego. Senior leaders have ego too. So there's something about not making them wrong in the first place. So whenever we make someone wrong, we are going to put them on the defensive. So we've got to kind of accept that if they're behaving a certain way and they're being in a certain way, that is how they're being. Don't make them wrong. Don't judge them. My greatest tip actually is always to come from curiosity. So to open up the conversation with them and get curious about what's behind the behaviors that they might be presenting with. I mean, it's quite difficult to answer this question without knowing a few more specifics, but certainly, engaging with them from a place of curiosity is a starting point. And to make sure that you are in rapport with them and that you, from an ego perspective, have let go of your wanting to make them wrong. Because if we're trying to make other people wrong, it's because we think we're right. And that is definitely our ego playing up. So we've got to make sure that we let go of our own ego, come from curiosity, and open up the conversation without judgment in order that it's safe to have that conversation. Because those leaders will also feel vulnerable if you're going to open up a conversation about that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. And I have a second question, and I will hand it back to Derek. Of all the areas where you have different levels of expertise, why did you decide to hone in on this topic for your book? And that is from Lisa.
Okay, so it was really easy actually. I think because over the years, I'd noticed in myself how I held myself back, but also working with my clients, with senior leaders, noticing what got in their way and how it was actually ourselves that got in our way. And then if I dug a little deeper, well, what was it about ourselves that got in the way? And it always came back to our ego. And I would also mention the work of Eric Berne here and transactional analysis. So that is a favorite model of mine. And of course, that is very much related to our ego states as well. So it just all aligned and tied in together. And the reason I'm so attracted to Eric Berne's work is I just think transaction analysis, which is, for those that might not have come across it, it actually starts talking about our ego from a parent, adult, child perspective and how we can show up in those different modes, using that as a metaphor, how we can show up in those different modes. And it's very tangible and gives us something that helps us manage ourselves. That understanding of, oh, I'm getting very judgmental here, which means I might be more parent ego, which we need to let go of if we want to start working collaboratively and open and exploring things with people. So that's why.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Super.
Derek, I'll hand it back to you. We do have more questions coming in. Shall I keep going, or shall I hand back to you? I know you have some key points.
Let's take one more, and then we'll go back into the main, and then we may get to take a couple more before the end of the session. So if you've got another one there, serve it up.
Perfect. Yeah, from our friend Jane in the UK. So her question is, how does ego differ from emotional intelligence and the neuroscience of procrastination? Because for me, it sounds very similar.
Well, I would agree. I think it is all very similar. I'd say that ego is about understanding our personality, our defense mechanisms, how we respond to fear. That because ego is very fear driven, and linking that to emotional intelligence. In order to manage our ego, we need to develop our emotional intelligence. We need to develop our self-awareness and our social awareness, noticing what are the things that might trigger us, because that's the social awareness. Somebody might ask me an innocent question, but because of the tone of voice, that hooks something in me and my ego gets triggered. So having that social awareness is so important. So very, very strong link between the two. And what was the third thing she mentioned? She mentioned emotional intelligence. How does it connect with emotional intelligence?
Neuroscience of
procrastination. Well, I think there is definitely a connection to neuroscience in that when we're triggered, we kind of go into that red mist, don't we? So that's kind of our ego certainly is in full flow. We might lose our temper. We might get very upset or frightened. That's our ego being triggered. Now, procrastination for me is, I'd say that's absolutely linked to your ego and holding yourself back and self-sabotaging in some way. And it's definitely linked to anxiety. So, it's either fulfilling a self-fulfilling prophecy that I'm not good enough, which again is a ego in play, because that's something you might have learnt when you were much younger, or it's putting something off because you're frightened of the consequences of it in some shape or form. So there's an anxiety linked to that as well. So I'd say it links in that way.
Yeah, and I find when I get triggered like that or get anxious like that, excuse me, I get utterly frozen. And so the procrastination comes around, and I often use the expression, for those people who've heard me before, it'll be boring to you, but you like that the mosquito in the nudist colony that knows exactly what they should be doing, that don't know where to start, and everything is you're so triggered that you just can't figure out where to start. And I think it sounds like it is all tied up together, Mary.
Yeah. So a question to ask yourself actually is, what do I need? What do I need right now that will help me take just one step? Because I think, again, our emotional needs, if they're not met, that causes us to feel anxious. So you think about a classic example is if you're preparing for a presentation and you're terrified about the presentation, so you might keep putting it off. So ask yourself, what do I need in order to just take one step in my preparation here? And it might be to understand your audience better, or it might be to talk it through with a friend. But when we ask ourselves what I need, we start to get to more practical solutions for ourselves.
Yeah, and Kristen Neff, the lady who speaks an awful lot on self-compassion, the researcher on self-compassion, uses that exact question in something she calls her self-compassion break, where she said, "What do I need of myself right now?" It's such a powerful question. Great, thank you, Aoife. I'll give you a holler in a couple of minutes just to see what other questions we got. But so for now, I'll let you go dark and go back to the folks there. Mary, let's turn it towards leadership, and it's interesting, kind of some reflections of the male-female conversation earlier on. But
Yes.
what's become very clear is ego is very much triggered by anxiety and fear. And the inclination of many leaders, and I say many leaders, and as I was thinking of this, I was thinking it's probably many male leaders, because that's my experience, is to be all macho and to hide the fact that you're feeling the anxiety and the fear. And in the book, one of the things you say is that, in terms of psychological safety, is not the best thing that a leader can do. Can you tell us more about that? Because that seems so counterintuitive to my generation, at least. You remain stoic and brave, and you don't let on, stiff upper lip and all.
Yes. And there is still a lot of stoicism around, because it's like, previous generations, what a lot of us have, I include myself in this, have been brought up to be that, put on a brave face, and certainly, the British culture is stiff upper lip and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, the whole thing for me is that by not, so as a leader, if you're feeling anxious or concerned about things and you're feeling, I'm the leader, I can't let it show, that doesn't mean it's not there. So the whole thing is it's still there. Whatever's causing that concern, that anxiety, doesn't go away. And I think the thing to be mindful of here is, how do you share it? Do you, if you share it from that sort of very frightened rabbit in the headlights sort of, oh my God, I'm thinking about the Dad's Army here, we're doomed. That maybe isn't appropriate to share in that way, because that's going to cause so much anxiety around your team that it's going to be difficult to take everybody with you. But there is something around being able to say, we are in a real conundrum here. We've got a real challenge going on here, and as leader, I don't necessarily have the answers. Because actually, the answers, as a leader, you're not expected to have all the answers.
Sure.
The answers are with your team. This is where we is so much more powerful than I, because it takes a group of people, it takes a team of people often to innovate and to come up with those solutions that you would never have been able to do on your own. And as a leader, there's something about being able to share your vulnerability from that point of view, in order that you engage others to come forward with their ideas as well. And then on the other hand, and I suppose what I'm turning this into, in terms of answering your question, is putting a plug for leaders, the benefits of them being vulnerable. If as a leader you go first and you are vulnerable, you will encourage your team to be open and honest with you. So as human beings, if we are pretending that everything's fine and it's not, you're heading for disaster.
Sure.
Because you might be looking good, and we're all looking good, but underneath, we're not addressing the issues that need addressing here. And so there's something about, again, going back to this making wrong. Don't make people wrong for getting things wrong. Part of working and part of innovating is that things won't always work out. What is it? I always quote the Post-it note here. You know how the Post-it note was a failure.
Oh, yeah.
It was NASA trying to create some sort of glue that they could create that would help keep spaceships together. I'm probably misquoting that hugely as a story, but that's my memory of it.
Yeah.
And as a result, they had this glue that they found didn't really stick, but it did stick temporarily, and they could move it around, it would stick again, and hence the Post-it note was born. So that was born out of a failure. So there's something about, as a leader, being vulnerable so that you can make other people feel okay to be vulnerable and own up to their mistakes, so that you can learn, you can harness the learning from it, rather than covering it up, and therefore potentially you're covering up a disaster.
And there is something, and you alluded to it there, but it really does then emphasize the necessity for leaders to develop their own self-awareness and their own self-regulation, so that, as you say, when they communicate, it's not Dad's army, or Chicken Little, the sky is falling, that it's done in a way which is open, honest, vulnerable, but not negatively emotionally contagious. That you don't send them into a complete flap, but you just make it okay for them to feel vulnerable, right?
Yes, absolutely. And also be okay that we don't have all the answers at the moment. It's like we don't have it now. That doesn't mean we won't have it in the future.
Sure.
The whole thing of leading today is you're leading an emerging process. We don't know look at what's happened in the last 2 to 3 years, with the pandemic. We didn't know what was around the corner. Look how we all managed and how we all coped with that. Look how businesses transformed themselves within a matter of weeks that would have normally taken them years, I would have imagined.
Absolutely. But
we were able to do that. So we are a lot more resourceful and resilient than we think we are. So there's something about trusting the process and trusting that emergence, and that we don't have the answers yet, but that doesn't mean we're not going to have the answers or the solution.
Sure. And wouldn't it be great if we could just keep that perspective that you've spoken about now, that some of us have, and I think it's there for me occasionally, the sense that we thought the world was coming to an end in March 2020, and hell, things kind of worked out okay. And wouldn't it be great if we could keep that perspective that we've been here before with much bigger things, and it all worked out, so it's okay.
Yes.
So be vulnerable to it.
Yes, absolutely. And, going to what you were saying there about, keeping that perspective, but also as a leader, a leader in today's world, it's part of your responsibility as a leader to keep developing yourself and to keep stretching yourself and increasing your self-awareness. Self-awareness isn't finite.
Sure.
We don't just say, I've got it. I've got self-awareness. That's it.
Right.
I don't need to do any more development now. It's an ongoing journey. I say for myself, I will keep doing this and keep developing myself until the day I die. It's just part of what I do, and I think that's part of what a leader needs to do and needs to be. If they really want to make a difference to the world and to the people that they're leading, then it's a real responsibility to keep working on yourself and working on your own development.
Yeah, and what you also say in the book that the process or the essence of leadership, and I may be slightly misquoting, but this will be the essence of the quotation, is that the essence of leadership is navigating the egos of the people around you. Yes. I know, with only 16 minutes left in the session, this is a big question, but how do you do that? How do you start to do that?
Well, I mean, the reason I say that is that I believe leadership is relational. So if you want to be a leader, you're going to have to learn to build relationships. And if you're not willing to, and there are plenty of leaders who are more introverted and bring huge strengths to their leadership. I've worked with some phenomenal, more introverted leaders. But you've still got to have that ability to build relationships with people and to build your sensitivity to where other people are coming from. And it goes back to that old chestnut of start with you building your own self-awareness muscle. Start to get to know yourself, your preferences, your strengths. So look at it from a positive point of view. What are the strengths that you bring? But also, what are the beliefs that might help or hinder you? And how might your ego help or hinder you? Because, beliefs are part of what makes up our ego. And work with the things, take one step at a time and just keep working with building that self-awareness, building that ability to relate to people and understand people, put yourself in other people's shoes. It's very hard to take people with you if you don't really understand where they're coming from and you don't understand that they might be frightened. They've got their own egos acting up, and wherever we meet resistance when in change, I do a lot of work with leaders who are navigating change. Whenever you meet resistance, that is your ego, because that is fear-based. Resistance is all about being frightened about the future. So it's so important for a leader at that point to really listen, practicing. I think listening is one of the most powerful skills of a leader, to be able to listen really from a place of being present, let go of your own agenda, understand and practice compassion for those that you're leading, because they're frightened. That's why they're resisting the change.
Yeah, we're all frightened,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting because there's something I think in all of us when we think, and you know, you read something that says it's about navigating the egos of other people. You start to think it's all about how do I manage them, but what's really clear is it all begins with self work. It begins with self
Yeah.
awareness, with knowing yourself, as you say, knowing your strengths, knowing the things that trigger you, and so the best thing that a leader navigating the ego map, if you like, of the workplace, the best thing they can do is work upon themselves.
Absolutely. And I love that you raised that, because I remember when I first started working with ego and with transaction analysis and running workshops, quite often have leaders saying, "All right, I've got some really great ways that I can manage that conversation with that person over there,
Yeah,
and I'm going to make sure they change."
yeah,
It's not about changing others. Others will change
sure.
around you, but it has to start with how you manage yourself first. That's why that question about approaching senior leaders, you can't go in with your ego making them wrong.
Sure.
You have to look at how can I manage myself around these leaders in order to open up that conversation. So absolutely, it starts with yourself. So it's looking at how can I apply this to myself in order to then influence others. You can't force them, you can only influence.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm going to bring Aoife back in because I can see Aoife on the monitor here, and I saw her furiously head down and typing away there. So I'm guessing that we've got a couple more questions or comments coming in from folks. Anything you want to share there, Aoife? Oh,
One second, sorry.
Yeah, there we
10
go.
different pages open here. Yes, we do indeed. Thank you, Derek and Mary. Finton is asking, he says, as you have said, there is a bandwidth of acceptance in the level of vulnerability. The danger is also being vulnerable for the sake of reaction can be manipulation. Have you any advice on how to stay authentic to your own situation?
Okay.
Big one.
So, and I totally understand what that question. I mean, I've watched leaders. I can think of a leader that I came across this many years ago, mind, and he would cry almost on cue to kind of as a demonstration of vulnerability. And it was so, people would actually sit there going, some people would believe it and think, oh my goodness. Others be, it was so like inauthentic and manipulative, I would say. It was using it in a purpose to persuade people to his point and win people over to him. And so, you know, it was horrible to see, actually. So how to stay authentic? I mean, the whole thing that's hard is that because ego is unconscious, we don't always know when we are being inauthentic. So it's like peeling the layers of an onion. So, and that's why I keep talking about, I feel like I keep mentioning self-awareness. It's becoming almost boring the amount of times I've mentioned it. But that's why being on our own journey is so helpful, because it is about peeling the layers of the onion. So giving yourself time to reflect, developing your self-awareness so that you notice in the moment, you know, you can catch yourself in the moment. Oh, I've just said, no. So for example, I'll give an example of one of my ego traps is people pleaser. So I'll quickly say, yes, of course, I'll help you with that. And that's my ego off it's going. And then I'll sit back later and think, oh, why did I say I'd do that? I don't know I've got the time to do that. Or how. And so there's something about catching myself in that moment to know that's actually my ego. I'm not necessarily being authentic here. I want them to like me. I want to please them. And so what I've learned to do, and so it's learning ways that work for you, is catch myself in the moment, and might even say, oh, I'm catching myself saying yes here. I think I need to check my diary first.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why the self-awareness is so key, to catch yourself in that moment. And even say it. I think actually stating something like I'm catching myself saying yes, it's something I tend to do. I better check my diary first. By stating it, you're stopping it have the power over you, and that is about being more authentic with it. I'm not sure that answers the question fully. I think it's a very good question.
Mary.
Oh, good.
Exactly.
I think it's a good question. I think
me.
Authenticity, or you know, we're on the journey of it all the time. It's peeling those layers back.
Yeah.
And you know, whenever we come up against something where we're giving it excessive energy. This is where the drama comes in, when, you know, your partner's dropped the towels on the floor for the umpteenth time, and suddenly it's like the end of the world that they've done that. Whenever there's excessive energy, that also is signs and symptoms that there's an inauthenticity going on. Because actually, what you might really want underneath that is just that they do something that's important to you, and they're not doing it. And does that represent how much they love you? No, there's all sorts of different questions you can ask around that, but it is the peeling of the layers.
Great.
Thank you, Mary.
I think we've time for one more question. Sorry, I cut across you there, Aoife.
It's hard to hop in with that slight 1 second delay, not to worry. And no, just an agreement. Bernice was sharing, this is so true. When you change yourself or your approach, other people will adjust in response. And then just to your comment there, Mary, that's so powerful, so useful to stop yourself in the moment.
Yes, absolutely, so I think, if you can.
We had a final question. I know, Derek, this is something I've heard you speak about before, and Mary has mentioned today being triggered. So Raju is asking, if, as you say, ego is triggered by fear, what are fears triggered by besides a saber-toothed tiger?
Oh, great question.
How long
so
have you got?
Of course, and in the old days, it was the saber-toothed tiger when we were, you know, cavemen and women out on the plains looking for lunch. It would be a saber-toothed tiger. Nowadays, you know, I talk about social anxiety, so it can be all sorts of things. The whole thing is that you could. This goes into the world of existential psychology, really, because, you know, we're all ultimately frightened of death. That's the ultimate thing, which is why the saber-toothed tiger will terrify us. But in the modern day, we're not faced with saber-toothed tigers. Generally speaking, we're not. We might be faced by a bus in the middle of a road. We've got to get ourselves out the way. But we are faced with different things to do with our social anxiety that we've given meaning to. And that's why it's so individual as to what might trigger you. And that's also why for leaders, they might resist being vulnerable, because they've learned that they've got to look good and not look bad in the way they show up. And therefore they'll try and cover up and avoid looking bad to reduce their anxiety. And yet, if only they realise by opening up and being more vulnerable, actually, I'm nervous here, I'm not sure where we're going, that could have such a greater impact in terms of what they're creating with their team than that cover up. But yeah, all sorts of things. So not looking good, looking bad, looking silly, we get frightened by. Losing our jobs, we get frightened by, because there's a worry of how am I going to get my livelihood. You know, they're perfectly valid fears. I'm keep my livelihood going. But the whole thing is that whenever we're faced with challenges like that, things, you know, we always have options and choices. That's the thing to remind ourselves of. That even if you're faced with you know, I can remember being faced with redundancy, and actually when I look back now, at the time it felt horrendous, like, oh my God, I'm being made redundant. Didn't feel good, it was very scary. When I look back now, I actually navigated that perfectly fine, and I'm here still telling the tale. So a lot of what we do is fantasies in our heads as well, which causes us anxiety. So that's another version of our saber-toothed tiger, I guess, is what the things we make up in our heads.
And even that label redundant, that's a horrible thing, to be made redundant. God almighty.
Yeah. It's so different for everyone. I remember I was working in the States for almost 10 years, Mary, and suddenly my green card was declined, which was a shock to me. I was losing my job and my friends and everything. So I had 2 months to pack up and get out. And I was doing very well in my career. It was growing. I was a young female leader. So I was excited by that part. My ego was motivated by what I was doing. I was in a great work company. And I remember going in to speak to a therapist about it. And she sat there and asked me different questions and then said, you know, and what is it you're worried about? Or what is versus what if type thing. And I didn't have an answer for her, because at the end of the day, you know, everything was going to be okay, but it was just such a shock to the system. And the things that really mattered to me in that moment were being compromised, you know, and of course, then I started working with Genos, and obviously life is great. We're in a good place again, but it does seem to be unique for everyone, the things that matter to different people and what triggers different people.
Absolutely. Well, there's the whole thing about, for some people, status is important. For other people, relationship is important. For other people, fairness is important. And so people will be triggered by different things in that way. So,
folks, I'm going to jump into that slight pause because I know we could go on for an age, but we promise people that we get them out at the top of the hour. So we've about 4.5 minutes to do that. Mary, this has been a fascinating conversation. I know we could go on for a long time more, and I hope you'll hang around behind the scenes so we can have a chat afterwards. Because I want to ask the folks at the very top of the session, we said, hey, if we could talk Mary into coming back sometime over the next couple of months to talk about the particular challenges of how to approach leadership development in a mixed gender environment, and particularly how to overcome that unconscious bias, etc. Do me a favor and just put into the chat if that's something that would be an interesting topic and will get your socks rolling up and down. Pop it into the chat and we'll have that, and we'll have Mary, and we'll try and convince her to come back sometime in the next couple of months. So Mary, thank you very, very much. I know we've only scratched the surface, but folks,
we have.
Buy the book. It's absolutely jam full of not just great research and great insights, but a phenomenal number of real life case studies that just illustrate the way this plays out, that bring it alive. So thank you very much, Mary. I hope you will be able to hang around for a couple of minutes. Let me go back and do our kind of finish up stuff. So where are we? First thing is we have set up a resource page for Mary's content, so you can get a link to Mary's site where you can get a free chapter of the book if you want to. There's a link there for the book on Amazon, so that you can go and buy it right away if you want to. And there's also, we didn't get to talk about this, but one of the things that Mary mentions in there in the book is that for leaders in the development phase in developing their self-awareness, one of the really great tools is journaling. And we've just put a link into our free journaling app, which is a really, really nice way of structuring your journaling. So if you're fast enough, you can put your camera over that QR code and it'll take you through to that page, and you can get those links. Don't do it just yet. Do it and put it in the background. But Aoife's going to drop that link into the chat for you anyway. As I told you, you really don't want to miss next week. We got another great lady coming along, and she really can light up a room. This time she's going to light up a room not just with the force of her personality, but actually with the force of the 5 things that she has found from all of the EI leader programs that she's done over the last couple of years are the 5 signature behaviors that leaders bring into the way they show up to people. So the sort of behaviors that we can assimilate to have a greater impact upon people. And it doesn't have to be in a leading capacity, because we're all at times leaders, even if we don't have a formal leadership role. For example, if we have children, if we have friends, if we have peers, we're leading all the time anyway. So really great session coming up next week. We don't have time for more questions, so I am going to wish you all the very, very best. I'll put this back to Mary's resource page for now. Looking forward to seeing you next week, as they say on the TV. Same time, same channel. Wishing you all the best. Take care, folks. Bye-bye. And we are off. Oh,
great! I'll take my sheet of paper away.
What's that?